Today on The State of Us, President Biden's budget. Does it really matter? And how does the process actually work? Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're going to talk about the budget because President Biden has released his budget. And rather than do what probably everybody else is doing, which is talk about exactly what's in the budget, we're going to take a little bit higher level approach and lay out for you how the process is supposed to work versus how it actually works, and why it might be better for everybody if we improved the process. And when we say everybody, we mean not just Republicans, not just Democrats, but everybody. Because really the way it works right now isn't at all the way that the system says it's supposed to work.
Right. The current system, we're not even talking about the system 200 years ago or 100 years ago or 50 years ago. But in the current system, and it doesn't, the way it's supposed to work, the Democratic leadership nor the Republican leadership do it the way it's written. And it's just overlooked by everybody that they're not meeting the deadlines and that they're not following the rules that each side set up to run the system. And I think that's important for everybody to know is, number one, understand the way it's set up. And then understand the bottom line is neither side follows the way I understand that, they set it up. This isn't like the Democrats made rules that the Republicans don't want to follow or vice versa. That's not the way it goes. They agreed this is the way we're going to do the process, and neither the Democrats when they're in power or the Republicans when they're in power lately follow the rules that they set up. Federal law requires that presidents submit to Congress an annual budget proposal no later than the first Monday in February. Now, I haven't looked at a calendar today, but I think we're in March.
That's right.
So Mr. Biden, like presidents of both parties before him, is submitting his proposal late. President Trump did this too, okay? But what's their punishment?
Well, the law says they're supposed to, Lance. Isn't that enough? Apparently not.
But I'm saying nothing's going to be done.
No.
Nothing has been done to any president, Republican or Democrat.
I mean, Biden, as far as I know, he's kept getting his paycheck.
Who's turned it in late, right?
I've never worked for anybody that would be okay with me turning something in 30 days late that was in my job description.
Your boss came to you and said, you need a budget for the Smith proposal by Friday. Okay, Friday comes. You're like, yeah, I don't have that done. I'll get it to you in about a month. Who would still have a job then, right? Or if you're
Congress and the president,
or if I'm working if I'm working fast food and the person comes up to me and said, "Hey, we need those French fries," okay, well I'll get them. I need them, in 5 minutes. All right, I'll get them to you. A month later, hey, I got those French fries done that you wanted last month.
Right?
You would still have a job?
Well, it's not just a suggestion. I mean, it's a law.
Yeah, but my point is to you, what's the punishment?
Well, yeah, exactly. None. It doesn't matter.
And if you don't have a punishment, who would follow the rule?
Exactly.
I used to bring that up at school all the time. Administrators would make those, well, we're going to have a rule that says, blah, blah. So what happens if you don't do it? Well, they have to do it. It's the rule. I said, no, you don't understand. These are teenagers and they're smart. And so what's the consequence? Well, we don't have one. Well, then the rule's a waste of time. No, this is the new rule. Okay. And I take it back and the students would say, well, Mr. Jackson, what's the consequence if we don't follow that rule? There isn't one. It's funny. Then we're going to follow a rule. There's no consequence. I'm like, I'm just telling you, that's what the principal said.
I was told I have to tell you there's this new rule. And by the way, there's no punishment if you don't do it.
So the president's supposed to have a budget out by the first week in February, and he doesn't yet, but there's no punishment. So he's going to give it to us, when he feels ready here in March.
So that's supposed to be the first step. And the other thing is, you might say, well, wouldn't the president want to get this to Congress on time? Because, that gives them time to consider it so that they can vote on it so that we can have a budget. Well, yeah, that is the thinking, right? The thinking is, Lance, the president gives it to Congress the first Monday in February. April 15th, Congress has to pass a budget resolution. And then it can be enacted for the new budget year at October 1st, which is when the new fiscal year for the government starts. So, I mean, there is a nice timeline here of several months in between each step.
They've established a pretty good
time
timeline.
to negotiate, time to go back and forth, hash everything out. Of course, the other thing they don't tell you, though,
why doesn't the president just tell everybody this is the budget?
Why?
Yeah, I mean, he's the president.
Oh, well, because the president doesn't get to decide how much money to spend.
Oh, so this is
Congress decides that.
So really the president's opinion doesn't matter.
Well, it's supposed to matter because Congress is supposed to hear what the president would like to do and then decide how much or how little of that they will do.
Right. But
instead, they're not going to look at his budget. They're going to put out their own budget.
Yeah, but my point is the president has no power to enforce their budget.
No.
It's really, to me, it's a wasted step. And I say that because I had so many students when I was teaching would say, well, they're the president. Don't they get to make up everybody's mind? I said, go back, read the Constitution. Who has the power for any money issues?
It is a budget request.
It's the House of Representatives, right? And then they control the purse strings, and then Congress votes on it. And the president can either veto it or sign it into law. And they go, so why do they even do a budget? And I'm like, well, that's a really good question because it says they have to. But honestly, and I'm not saying this tongue in cheek, the president has no power over how the money's spent. And people get mad at either Biden or Trump or Obama or Bush because, well, they're spending our money wrong. They don't spend the money. All they have is a suggestion. They have no power to spend the money according to the Constitution. That all comes from Congress.
The thinking is a good idea. In practice, it doesn't work that way because it's that same thing of, they found out that there's no consequences or no reason that Congress has to even consider the president's budget because they're not required to. You know what I mean?
Per the Constitution,
right?
Which are the laws that govern our country.
The budget, but the Congress doesn't even have to look at it if they don't want. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, we told the president he has to do this, but we're not promising the president that we're going to even vote on it. We're not even promising that we'll even look at it. I mean, because we don't have to. So there's that component of the thinking was, well, you want the branches to work together. The person that's administering the government, the administrative branch, right, should probably tell the branch that's doing appropriations and creating laws what their priorities are and what they need money for so that they could get that money so they could do the things that they've been elected that they think they're supposed to do. All that sounds nice in theory, but, Congress, it didn't take very long to realize that, well, we don't have to do what they're asking, right? Well, no. Do we have to look at it? Well, no. Okay. So, I mean, send us your budget. We'll look at it if we get bored.
So any president is just flapping his jaws into the wind.
Well, and the real kicker, Lance, is that, they have to submit something. The budget request documents that the administration puts together often run well over 1,000 pages and detail exactly how a president would spend trillions of dollars over the fiscal year. Mr. Biden proposed a $5.8 trillion budget for fiscal year 2023. The document is the product of months of work behind the scenes with senior officials at every agency drafting proposals that are sent to the White House Office of Management and Budget for review. The OMB assembles the proposals and the president formally submits the document to Congress, all for something that Congress doesn't actually have to consider. You might say, okay, well, that all sounds very bad. Why don't we fix that? Well, I think we should. And I think the way that you fix this first part of the process is it is law that the president has to submit this. It's also law that Congress must, not can if they want to, must by X date vote on the budget as proposed, up or down. Now, they want to vote down, that's fine. Then they can come up with their own thing, but they may not do anything else until they have voted on yes or no on the president's budget. And the president, if he doesn't...
By said date.
Right. And the punishment for the president's easy. If you do not submit your budget by the said date, then Congress does not have to vote on it. Easy incentive. You want Congress to vote on it? Submit it on time. If you don't submit it on time, then they can do whatever they want. And it gives the president authority because if they submit it, he knows that Congress is going to have to be on the record. Every member of Congress is for or against this budget, And if you don't submit it by then you can't whine and complain.
Oh, because the really important part of this whole process is for 2 years from now, when all sides are going to run for re-election. So they're not really doing this to further benefit the country and the American people. This is all a public power play between Congress and the president as to who can get the most brownie points heading into the next election. That sure sounded like what you just described to me. Am I reading too much into that? But didn't we elect them? Either as Congress people or presidents to run the country as needed for the benefit of the American people. And it's been 20 or 30 years since we had a balanced budget for that year.
Not only is it late, but it's never balanced either. We don't turn the budget in on time, and we also don't actually turn in the other thing is we call it a budget, and it's like,
and it's a relatively new idea, right, to have a deficit.
Yeah. I mean, historically, in the country's history, usually Congress didn't.
So normally we don't run a deficit, and normally
unless we're at war.
Right, unless we're at war, but then we quickly balance the budget after the war.
Well, that's usually an important priority. But we also technically haven't gone to war since World War II either, so technically.
But after that, we balanced the budget.
Right.
Okay. And the last time we balanced the budget was?
But we didn't want to declare war anymore because that'd be mean, and people might think less of us. So we don't do that. So then we can deficit spend because, we have to support the military operations that are going on, but we're not at war. And then we don't balance the deficit afterwards because we're just kind of always fighting in different places. But again, we're not at war. And so you kind of have this perpetual thing. I mean, really since, end of the Great Depression, end of World War II, where the status quo changed. We stopped doing this process the way that it used to be done fairly consistently. It's not that you don't ever deficit spend, right? I mean, even in business, there are years where you accept that I have to spend more money this year so that I can make more money in the future. But I don't know a lot of businesses that are still around, Lance, that say, well, I'm going to deficit spend every year for the next 30 years. And
because then nobody would buy their stock and their company would go bankrupt.
Right. And I have no plan to ever balance it again. I just going to deficit spend forever. Point being, no, are the government and the business the same thing? No. Should they be treated exactly the same? Depends on who you ask philosophically. The point is, though, that some of these fundamental underlying principles that we now just like, well, that's just the way it is. We just deficit spend. Well, we don't have to, but we do. And, well, Congress is always late, passing this. Well, we don't have to, but we do. And why don't we? Well, one of the reasons is no punishment. We're going to talk about.
Stay tuned because we're going to address that as well.
That's right. We've addressed how to fix the president's wagon. Let's talk about fixing Congress's wagon. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. The U.S. has experienced a fiscal year and budget surplus 5 times in the last 50 years. The most recent one was in 2001. When there is no deficit or surplus due to spending and revenue being equal, the budget is considered balanced. So the last time that we did not have a budget where we planned to spend more than the government was going to generate was in 2001. That was the last time.
And we've only done it 5 times in the last 50 years.
Correct.
So,
and we've not done it at all in the last 20.
Gotcha. So 90% of the time, 90% of the time in the last 50 years, we haven't had a balanced budget.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Just
90% of the time.
Yeah. No balancing. So again.
So you can do deficit spending sometimes, but we do it 90% of the time.
Well, and what is deficit spending though? Because.
Okay. That's a good term.
We just talked about, because are we saying that back in 2001, the country didn't have any debt? No, we still had debt. We had debt in 2001. What we're saying is the budget, right, which is just for the year, just for the fiscal year, October 1st through September 30th of the following year, that budget, the amount coming in for the government was equal to or exceeded the amount that we allocated to spend. That's it. If it's the other way around and we spent more than we're bringing in, then we had to borrow additional money, which increases the national debt and thereby has to be theoretically paid back.
We increased the national debt 45 of the last 50 years.
That's the other way to look at that is 45 of the last 50 years, we've increased it. So the other, we talked about how do we fix the president and also make the president's budget submission something that actually has to be taken seriously. Because again, I think there's good arguments both ways. Either get rid of the president submitting one altogether or require Congress to vote on it. But don't do what we have right now, which is, require that the president waste all this time and money to do this thing, and he doesn't have to turn it in on time, and Congress doesn't have to vote on it. Stupid.
Right.
I mean, I think that's really dumb.
Right.
Because why would, you're not doing anything. So we addressed how to fix that. Easy. The other thing is, I think it's easy to fix, Congress's vote too, is obviously make it required by law, not targeted, okay, which is how it is right now for April 15th. It's not targeted for April 15th. A budget resolution must be passed by April 15th. And if it is not, Congress will not be paid until a new budget is passed and will not receive back pay.
We've said stuff like that for years on this show because all we're equating it to when you say, "Oh, that's not," no, what it comes down to is that's the way the rest of us get paid, right? If we don't do the job, we don't get paid. I mean, we'd be fired. We're not telling them we're not going to take their job away from them. We're just going to withhold pay. I mean, we're actually being nicer to them than most of our bosses would be to us.
We could go a step further. If Congress doesn't get it in, then you're all up for re-election this November.
Right.
I
mean, we could do something like that because that's what would happen to most of us if we had been given a deadline by our boss and not met it.
Right, you'd be fired.
We'd be fired.
Well, you'd probably have a hard time getting hired someplace else too.
Right, because they're not going to write you a good recommendation because, they don't follow deadlines.
Yeah, I could be convinced that rather than just not pay them, if they don't submit it on time, not only do they not get paid until it's submitted, but when their term is over, they are not eligible for re-election. They may not again seek the same office.
Now, see, that's being really harsh, and I wouldn't be.
Well, why would we want? Why do we want people in government, Democrats or Republicans, who do not do their job? And it's, by the way, folks, remember, they're all paid six figures.
Right.
Are most people listening to this show paid six figures? I don't think so. Is the average American paid six figures? Well, yeah, we're not. And the average American's not. So we're going to pay Congress more than we pay the average American. We're going to ask them to do less than we ask the average American to do. And they're not going to be punished when they don't do it. And then we're going to let them keep their job. We're going to put them back in office and keep giving them our money that they don't have to meet deadlines for.
Well, I like it. I don't know, send your comments,
Congress
folks.
doesn't like it.
Send it to the show. Podcast at thestateofus.org. How do you feel? But I like Justin's proposal.
Barred from running.
We've always said that they shouldn't get paid until they get the job done.
Yeah, I want to go a step further.
But now we've got it up there on the table. Do
your freaking job.
If you don't do your job, you get fired.
What a concept.
What a concept. Like somebody new. I don't know how is that un-American, right? I think that is the most American suggestion I've heard in a long, long time. If you don't do your job, you get fired. And
none of them get to beg out as it wasn't my fault, because if you didn't reach a deal, you're partly to blame because you didn't give enough ground, So all of government is going to have to coalesce around this notion in Congress of we better frickin' pass this because we all are going to lose our jobs at the end of this term.
And you do understand, folks, if that happens, it's going to be better for all of us because whether you agree totally with what they come up with, at least they're going to come up with something and the country will be continued to move forward. This partisanship that we're stuck in right now is hurting the average American. I don't care whether you're a Democrat and think the Republicans are stupid or you're a Republican and think the Democrats are going straight to hell, they're not helping us. Either way, Congress is not helping us.
It doesn't do anybody any good. Right. It doesn't do anybody any good for the budget to be continually delayed.
We're all going to be better off if they get a budget done, whether we agree with it totally or not. If they get it done on time, that's only going to benefit all of us. So this isn't an attack. This isn't on an individual party. This is an attack on the partisanship system that is developed in our government. And it doesn't have to be that way. And if we have to pass a law to get rid of it, then that's what we're advocating here right now today is let's pass the law to advocate bipartisanship. Because guarantee you, if you told these people who think they've got a job for life in Congress, because, you know, the election rates in the Senate are astronomical. And I think in the House, it's almost 90% to be reelected. Okay. Once you win, you basically get to stay in. If all of a sudden they didn't do their job and get the budget on time and they're out, guarantee you they'd get a budget on time. And that benefits every American.
So the other big elephant in the room is how much of the budget does Congress really get to decide on?
Well, yeah, because this is right. Oh, this is the budget. Oh, we're all talking about the budget now. This is, and we're gonna fix it, boy. We're gonna cut this, and we're gonna do this, or we're gonna increase spending here because this is the budget. And they talk about it like you got the whole piece of pie, right? I mean, here, mom made a cherry pie, and she sat it down in front of you and said, "There you go. The entire pie is yours." Lance, you get to do whatever you want to with the entire pie because it's the entire budget.
But that's not what Congress gets to do.
Nope, doesn't work. They talk about the budget as an entity, as a whole, but it's not because what is it? Give us the numbers, Justin. What part of that pie did my mom cut away before she gave me the whole pie to do what I wanted with?
Right. Well, Lance had his friends come over. Mom made a pie and said, you get to decide how to divide this up to feed all your friends. But wait, most of the pie, most of it, is going to be taken away before you get to divide it up because it's required by law that I get to keep that and you don't have any say
like
over
two-thirds,
what happens.
right?
Yeah.
It's like 2/3 of the pie is non-discretionary income, which means 2/3 of the money in the budget is spent before
without
Congress
negotiation
and the president start to negotiate, right? So mom set that pie and she cut 67% of it away and said, okay, here's 1/3 of the pie left for you and your friends to have. But she's not done.
Oh, no. Nope.
Because of the discretionary money.
Right. Well, yeah, air quotes here, folks, because what we just talked about was mandatory, right? This is by law.
Like Social Security and.
Right. Is not negotiated.
Right.
By law, not negotiated. So that's happening. It's in the budget. No matter what, we're stuck. Well, the remaining third isn't all they get to play with either because discretionary spending is broken up into two broad categories: military spending and non-military spending. And military spending typically makes up close to half of all discretionary spending. So now, and look, I got family in the military. I'm not saying we shouldn't be spending money on the military, but when you're talking about what's Congress deciding on, Lance, now we're down to that remaining 33%, right? Well, nope, cut that in half because half of that, we already know how we're spending
15% of that 33% is already going to the military.
Yeah.
So when mom made this pie for my friends and I to share, I thought I was going to get a whole pie. And what I got was 15 to 20% of the pie.
Right. I mean, that what you're left with at the end to feed everybody with is 15 to 20%.
And if you're like my
total.
mom, her normal pie pan, she would cut it into 8 slices. That means there's 1 slice of pie left that we're going to negotiate with my friends over, because 7/8 of that pie is already designated for other things.
So you and your friends get to fight over the one piece.
So when Congress,
and then we're surprised that it doesn't go well.
So right.
I mean, how often would your friends come over if they come over? Well, I'm going to have them. Hey guys, I got a pie.
They don't even get a
come
bite.
over and we're all going to share one piece.
But this is what takes our government past their deadlines to decide on.
is the one piece.
Is the one piece.
Because it's not even everything.
I hope, for you visual learners out there, you're getting that, okay? Everything except for that one piece of the pie in that whole pie in that pie pan has already been designated for spending in the budget. So when they talk about arguing over the budget, they're arguing over one slice of an entire pie. And they can't figure it out.
They can't figure that out. But at the same time, I do think it's worth making that point, Lance, that's part of the reason they can't figure it out. I mean, think about how would you, and not to give Congress a lot of sympathy, but seriously, how would you invite 10 friends over and there's a pie with 8 pieces and 7 of those are taken away. And now you're told that you have to feed all 10 people with one piece of pie and you have to and not only feed them, but you have to keep them happy enough to think that you should still be in charge. I mean, talk about how are you supposed to do that? Because that one piece of pie, Lance, right? Everything that's left in there, education, infrastructure, the Department of Health. I mean, oh my God, all these things that, and we have to somehow get everybody to agree on how we should divvy up this one piece of the pie. And we're surprised that they can't agree on how to spend that one piece. Again, I'm asking you listeners, you reach out and explain it. How would you do that? How would you make all 10 people in the room happy with one piece of pie? Especially when you started with 8. Okay, well, maybe we can't really make everybody happy, but we can probably get close to making everybody at least somewhat happy. Well, now we got one piece and there's 10 people here and they're all hungry. Ain't nobody going to be happy when this is done. Most people probably aren't even going to be satisfied. Most people are probably going to be hungrier because you gave them just a little tiny bit and you didn't do a good job because they didn't have enough. You gave them a taste.
And how many problems did you solve? None.
Right.
Because you didn't have enough money to go after it to solve it in the first place.
Nobody's going to survive on one piece of pie. I mean, I don't care how well you ration it. At some point, all these people are going to die because you can't feed them with one piece of pie. It's not enough.
So it's another show. But the real issue here is we need to discuss the 2/3.
The elephant
is
the elephant that's crushing the ability to negotiate.
Well, it's 2 elephants.
Yeah. Well, really 3 because
it's Social Security.
Yep.
That's the big elephant that you were hinting at. My second elephant is the interest payment on the money that we're borrowing. You mentioned that at the beginning of this segment, that we have to borrow money every year to pay our bills. So, well, y'all know if you borrow money, you have to pay interest. So our government is paying interest. And that's the second biggest chunk of change that goes out every year and that's getting more and more every year. So that slice of pie that they have to argue over keeps getting smaller because we're having to pay.
They're not 8 equal slices every year either.
Exactly. We're starting to pay more interest every year because the national debt's going up. What's your third elephant?
I like pie too. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. So we like pie. Lance and I both like pie. I don't know if our listeners do. But if you do, you should send us an email. What's your favorite type, by the way? Lance said this is a cherry pie that we're dividing up.
That's because that's my favorite. By far.
But what do you like? Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. By the way, not to get too sidetracked, but I saw our producer in person for the first time in a while, Bradley.
Yeah. He's still alive?
Yes.
That's good. I thought he was a non-entity, but I thought he was just somebody's name that you read at the end of the show.
Bradley stays pretty calm most of the time.
He's a real person? Yeah. Okay.
He's a member of Gen Z, and I felt obliged to share with our audience that he wanted to vehemently protest his inclusion in Gen Z.
Oh, the Gen Z episode?
As somebody who is lazy.
Gotcha.
Because, and not that our listeners know him very well, but if you did, I'm not sure that I understand why this one thing could actually potentially frustrate Bradley. He's like, man, I need a mic because I got things to say about this. I mean, he agrees with our sentiment that, he sees a lot of people his age be that way, but like, no, not me.
But not him.
Right. He's about as mad about being a member of Gen Z as Lance is about being a boomer. And you know what?
That's why I like Bradley.
Yeah.
he doesn't fit with his generation.
Yeah.
Just like I don't fit with mine.
Anyway, speaking of not fitting with things, we were talking about how you divide up a pie.
That one piece will fit in the whole pie pan, though.
That's right.
Especially if it gets smaller every year.
Yeah, the piece, we're really going to be tightening the belt because there's going to be even less of a piece left. So we talked about those categories. What I was getting at, and Lance and I think we're just looking at it slightly differently, is he's putting all entitlements into one of those.
Entitlements. Okay.
Holistically. And I was going to say Social Security and Medicare and all of the attached subsidiary programs of those, because keep in mind that includes things like unemployment benefits, food stamps. It also includes things, right, like Medicaid, right, not just Medicare. So entitlements collectively that are in the mandatory spending bucket, that could be one bucket. And then, yes, the interest payments on the debt, which we have to keep paying to not default.
Well, we can't touch the entitlements, right?
No.
Because people are entitled to that money.
Well, that's why we call them that. Branding. I mean, branding is a powerful thing,
Except before the 1930s, none of those things existed.
Well, before, Lance, 1909, there actually wasn't a federal income tax at all.
Well, it was 1913, wasn't it?
Well, 1913 is when it was
added to the Constitution.
Yeah, when it was ratified. But yes,
the discussion
passed by Congress on 1909. Well, there's a classic example of government delay. That's like, I read a book the other day. You would love this, about the Lincoln Memorial. They started talking about the Lincoln Memorial 2 years after Lincoln's death, and they had not finished. The federal government had not finished the construction of the memorial until the late 1919s. So it took...
Well, don't even get me started.
It only took 60 years.
On how well the government is taking care of our national historic sites.
Oh, yeah.
That's a show I've wanted to do
there's a whole
since I went on vacation in October.
Well, but there's no money.
Because, right, they're closed, okay? You go to presidential homes and they're only open 3 days a week because there's not enough money allocated by the federal budget to open them every day of the week, or at least 5 days out of the week.
Got that, those entitlement programs, Lance, they eat up things.
2/3 of the budget.
2/3 of the budget.
Are entitlement programs and interest payment on the debt.
Well, actually, I mean, just to be clear, when you add in, which it's higher than that because, like you pointed out, those debt payments continue to increase. Because why? We continue to deficit spend.
We continue to
borrow more money.
We borrow more money every year.
So the amount of interest we have to pay goes up. So therefore, again, that shrinking piece of pie that we have left is getting smaller and smaller.
And that's what they're going to argue over for the next 6 months, is that little tiny piece.
They're going to argue. I'm not saying they're not going to argue over military spending, but historically speaking, in the last 20 years, that spending typically takes up around half, right? Sometimes 40%, sometimes 60%, but right in the neighborhood of 50% most of the time is taken up by that. So they're going to argue about where in the military to spend it. But basically, there's that chunk for the military, right? I mean, you can kind of set that aside because it's really not fair to say that.
So what are we going to do? We're out of time. I mean, we're just about out of time here. We're running up against the clock. So what do we
have a deadline.
What do we, and we can't just continue to go on. So
we could, but we'd get cut off.
Right. So what are we going to leave people with?
So how do you fix this? Well, we've done a show on entitlements and one of the ways to address them. But the other thing is, we've called them entitlement programs, Lance, and we've made them mandatory spending for the express intent of keeping Congress from negotiating them. You might say, well, why have we done that? Well, what Congress would tell us, right, is because we want to protect these programs, so we don't want to negotiate over them. The other way to look at it, and the way that I think is more realistic, is so that they can get out of having to have the difficult conversations about how to fix these programs, which were designed 100 years ago, not quite, and we're now surprised that they don't work quite the way they used to.
We're using an antiquated plan to take care of a current economic crisis.
And we've said that we can't change the plan. And that we're not only can we not change it, we're not going to discuss changing it either.
And that would be then why we have more and more trouble every year, and why we have not passed a balanced budget in 45 of the last 50 years. That's why, people. Okay. So when you understand that and you get mad at Congress, well, now maybe at least you understand, or the president, either one. But if you get mad at them, hopefully now you at least understand why you're getting mad at them. And that's not really, to me, that's the crux of the show today, is we're going to focus on the wrong things. And we are focusing on the wrong things. And we need to change the focus. We can fix the short-term problem with Justin's solution of they don't follow the rules, they all get fired. Okay. But we still have
There's an underlying structural problem.
But there's a structural problem to it. There's a systemic problem to it that we need to address. And that's what needs to happen. And then everybody's better off.
And all you people that care about what the founders intended, Adams, Jefferson, and the lot never intended for Congress to not discuss 67% of what they were going to spend every year. That wasn't part of the plan, And now, oh, well, it doesn't work. Well, it's not because it wasn't set up to work under that system. It was never designed to work this way. And now we're upset that it doesn't work. And the people whose job it is to fix that aren't required to discuss it. In fact, they're prohibited every year from doing anything about it.
Well, hopefully you're thankful that we did this show today. And you might be wondering, why do these guys pick these topics and why do they talk about this stuff? Well, it's because here at True Chat, we have a mission. And our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And I think we've done that today. We've laid it out for you. We've given you some solutions. We'd like to have things fixed just like you would. So share this with your friends and your coworkers and your family. And if they say, well, this sounds like the kind of show that I could get behind and these guys make sense, tell them they can find us as a podcast on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning. You can get those episodes as a podcast. Same episodes heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the United States and parts of Canada. My last final jab in the side of Congress, Lance, is to say that not only do we do all those things I said that we make them do, we require that they vote on the passage of Medicare, Social Security, and all entitlement programs every time they have to pass a budget. In other words, the programs stop functioning if you do not choose, rather than automatically continuing, opt in to continue them and agree on the terms under which they're going to continue. Again, it's not my job and it's not Lance's job and it's not your job out there listening to decide how to fix entitlements. We pay 435 members over $100,000 a year each to figure that out. And they don't have to.
There you go.
So let's make it so that they do. And if they can't, fire them and let's find somebody that can. For the State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch, member of Gen Z, proud member of Gen Z. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.